Hey everyone, Jason here. I'm going to double check to make sure we are live. I know the one time I don't check, it won't work. So, yep, there we are. We are live. So, hey there, I'm Jason Loxton, and this is Makin Bacon, all about helping you serve your fans, grow your income, and get the most out of your blog. Today's episode is brought to you by the International Sous Vide Association. The ISVA just wrapped its 2020 virtual summit with more than 250 attendees and 35 sessions. And it was a great success. They're currently starting to plan their 2021 conference and are looking for some great bloggers to work with, both as affiliates and volunteers leading up to the conference. They offer commissions of 30% for all ticket sales, and they have access to many of the biggest names in sous vide, including Master Chef Rich Rosendale, Chef James Pricione from the Food Network and Angelina's, and a lot of other great speakers that we can help put you in touch with if you're interested in covering sous vide. So if you or your audience is interested, you can sign up at theisva.org/affiliate. Now, on to the show. Life as a food blogger is generally pretty low-key most of the time. We write recipes, we take photos, we put it up on our website. But every once in a while, something goes wrong and you're thrust into a crisis. Or, there's a global pandemic. When this happens, it can be really hard to know what to do. But luckily, today's guest is the perfect person to help us navigate through it all. He is a Peabody Award-winning investigative reporter who covered healthcare and medicine for USA Today for most of the 1990s. He's an author of the best-selling handbook on emergency communications, The Communications Golden Hour, the essential guide to public information when every minute counts. And after spending more than 20 years at the intersection of technology, science, health, policy, and ethics, he is now a consultant to corporations, academic institutions, and other organizations on crisis communications and reputation management. I can't wait to learn from today's guest, communication strategist and occasional food and wine blogger, Doug Levy. Doug, welcome to Makin Bacon.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you. That was a nice intro. I appreciate it.
And welcome to people...
Capture of my resume, basically. Which is great.
Yeah, it's a very, very impressive resume. It's always interesting reading through people's bios, and yours is one of the more impressive ones.
It's called What Happens When You Have ADHD.
Nice. Plenty of energy to spend on a lot of different activities. We are, anyone that's joining us live, say hello in the comments. Let us know where you're from, what your blog is. And if you have any questions for Doug throughout the whole conversation, be sure to put them in there. I'll be monitoring the comments and I will be grilling Doug with any of the good questions that you have. We've also had a few pre-submitted questions, which I'm looking forward to. So I can't wait to dive into both the crisis management and working with traditional media, which is something else we're going to talk about. But before we get started, I always like to ask, what is it like around your dinner table on a typical day?
Well, since I live by myself, it's usually not very interesting. But I am a compulsive follower of current events. That comes from having been a network news producer where, I had to be up to the minute informed on what was going on. And then just having the sort of innate curiosity. And if I'm not actually consuming news during dinner, watching TV in some cases, or reading a magazine, whatever, it's a good time to be reflecting on it. And I think that is something people ought to do more of. At some point, you need to turn the inputs off and actually process it and figure out, hey, is that thing that got me irritated last hour really important, or is there something else that I should be paying more attention to?
I love that concept of not just kind of, scrolling through your feed, seeing what's popping up and bringing it all in, but to stop and think about the type of information you're getting and hopefully from a few different viewpoints and see what actually makes sense. Because I don't think there's much things out there that are kind of fair and balanced necessarily from, either extreme going on.
Well, that's true. And in fact, just this morning, one of my acquaintances whose politics are very different from mine posted something on Facebook. He basically was complaining that he had posted something a couple of days ago that was flagged as false. because it was. I mean, it was actually a misstatement of a scientific study. The study was real, but the post by this acquaintance of mine was not. And we see a lot of that where, for whatever reason, people take something that looks real or is real and writes a headline or a lead-in post, whatever, that makes it appear to be something different. And anyway, this individual was complaining that his post was flagged for being false. Well, if you don't want to be flagged for posting something false, don't post false things.
I think it was in the James Clear newsletter that went out this week. He had an interesting statement in there that it was basically, there's two ways that you can focus on being right. The one is being right now, and the other is showing that you were right. And I feel like there's a lot bigger emphasis right now on trying to prove that you were right versus making sure that you're right in the future and getting all the information that's out there.
Yeah, one of the things that I've worked with clients on many times over the years is, all right, if a story went out that was wrong, what's better, letting it go or correcting it? Mm-hmm. And that's not an easy analysis. There's a lot of factors that go into it. But correcting an error in the media is not always the best thing to do.
Mm-hmm. When do you think it is the best thing to do for an organization to make sure that the right information's out there?
Well, for one thing, if a reporter makes a mistake, you absolutely should let the reporter know they made a mistake, especially if it's a reporter who's likely to be covering you again. But you don't want to ask for a correction unless the story is the kind of story that is going to be referred back to many times. So, for example, if a newspaper states either the wrong outcome of litigation or has your corporate revenues wrong, something very tangible and specific, you want to make sure that gets corrected so that a researcher or another reporter or even the same reporter won't go back and repeat the mistake in a subsequent story. On the other hand, if that story is not going to come back and it's not a good story for you, pushing for a correction is going to keep the story alive longer. And we actually see that every day with a certain individual in Washington, D.C., who would be better. I mean, I really don't want to get into politics, but just a couple of days ago, there was a great example where there was a media report that was negative, but not specific. The response by the individual that it was about added new details that made it a story.
I feel like that's one of the things that, especially if you're on the negative side of publicity or of trolls, or, as food bloggers, we're usually not in these huge kind of maelstorms of national media, but in our own niche, and in our small areas, we can be. And I think that's something that we don't think about a lot, is that if something is out there that is negative about us and might even misrepresent what we're saying, if it's going to die down right away, then just, is it best to just ignore it as opposed to try to fix it, which is then going to create a fight and then kind of throw it back out there in front of people?
That's why I try to tell people to think twice before you post. Just in general, that's a good idea. One of the true leaders in social media and journalism, but his expertise is really social media, Sri Srinivasan, who runs a company called Digimentors. He had been the chief digital officer for New York City. He had been the chief digital officer at Columbia University, which is where I worked with him. And he talks about how he'll spend 10 minutes crafting a tweet. It may only be 140 or 280 characters, but it matters. And it's going to have a life of its own, especially if it's wrong. So put more care into what you're creating to reduce the possibility of unintended consequences. I'm remembering back to a story that wound up jumping into the newspaper off of social media. This was back when I was fully a journalist. There was a well-known chef who got into a fight with the owner of the restaurant he was working at. And I never did find out what actually drove to the point of argument, but let's just say that there was some rage tweeting happening. And of course I was going to write about it on my blog. And because of the people that were following my blog, it wound up in the newspapers. And that chef kind of had a problem to deal with. And it was sad because really great chef. And, over time, I'm probably one of the only people that remembers that. But it was an unnecessary reputation hit, both for him and for the restaurant. And it's like, why do that? It's not, have fights. Disagreements between people are fine in business. In particular, you should speak up when there's something wrong or you disagree with, have your own ethics and values. But does that really need to be out in public?
I think it's interesting that when you see these means of communication, like, especially Twitter was originally designed as something to kind of throw stuff out there and with a small group of people following you. And it's this kind of off the cuff medium, but you forget that, even removing personal, regular people's reputation management that comes back to haunt them, 5-10 years later, if you're a blogger, it doesn't really matter or a public figure, it doesn't really matter what the original intent of the communication medium was. You're using it to put out a business or a public statement, and taking the time to make sure that you craft something that accurately reflects your business is probably worth doing, especially when you're upset or in the middle of a crisis.
Exactly. If you go back about 10 years, you would have seen people like me telling folks to keep their business accounts separate from personal and all that. And by 2015, probably even before that, that boundary went away. And I actually think that's mostly a good thing. If you're doing something publicly, it's public. And that's a concept that I think people don't fully grasp. I have worked with a lot of law enforcement agencies, and one of the things that one of many things that law enforcement grapples with is that distinction. Of course, individuals have their First Amendment rights to express their opinions on whatever they like, but they also swore an oath to do a particular job. And if you're doing something outside of work that is inconsistent with your job, that matters.
I think it's really interesting looking at you have to realize what matters in your own kind of industry. I follow a lot of sports, and my wife's the news director of CBS Sports, so I hear a lot of the news around sports that happens. But if I talk about that I'm a Barcelona soccer fan, or I'm a Jazz fan, or a Steelers fan, that no one's going to be like, I don't want you to come be a brand ambassador for Anova or something because you like Barcelona. But if you're a professional soccer player, like Barcelona signed somebody, they found tweets of him talking about how much he loved Real Madrid and he hoped they beat the crap out of Barcelona, and they cut him. They nulled his multi-million-dollar deal and said, if that's the way you felt 5 years ago, you're not playing for us. And it's good to know just, what exactly industry are you in, and be careful. What you're going to say is going to stay out there forever.
Yeah, there is no delete function. And, even if you can delete a post, somebody may have screen capped it, and that's okay.
So people talk a lot about, wanting authenticity and being yourself and doing live video or in your recipes. And we're talking a lot about how you need to censor yourself and you can't, be careful of what you say. Where is that line between showing some of you, but not showing too much and not doing it in a way that's going to come back to bite you down the road?
I'm going to disagree with the use of the word censor there, because we're really not, or I'm certainly not talking about censoring of any kind. The more ideas that are out are, the better. I do advocate being careful. And what that means is thinking before posting, thinking before writing, but before you hit that publish button, review the post and put yourself in the shoes of both your intended audience and other people. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that what you're writing might be interpreted differently from what you're intending? And in law enforcement, so I wrote a book on law enforcement communications, and in the course of the research for that book, there are so many examples of completely well-intended posts that were written by somebody who was, I can't imagine, was unaware of the audience, but didn't take the moment to think, hey, could this be interpreted a different way? And, one really good example of that was a post by a police commander in a large city where they made a really good arrest of a burglary suspect. But the way he wrote the post only made sense to people within the police department. In fact, what should have been really good news for that community, most of the people who saw that post thought it was the commander celebrating his officers for doing their jobs that they're supposed to be doing every day. What wasn't clear was that it was two officers doing something entirely different from normal, and using some innovative tactics. But he didn't realize that the audience didn't know that, which is, it shouldn't take extra time to do that. And, when you're writing recipes, how many times have you seen a recipe that somebody has written where they're using the name of an ingredient that is colloquial? Mm-hmm. When I was at USA Today, I remember the first time I did a chef profile, and I had to call the chef back and say, hey, I don't think our readers have a clue what these things are. What are some other names that are, or if we can't get that, what's a substitute? If you're writing for other chefs, that's fine. But if you're writing for people who have, amateur kitchens, good kitchens, whatever, you got to make it accessible.
Almost by definition, especially as a blogger, you're writing for people that know less than you. And that's why they're following you, to learn from your expertise. And I think that's something that remembering that and remembering just how much you do know is critical. This has come up a few times in recent podcasts. And the example that I always use is I write about modernist cooking, which has some really neat stuff, and people are interested in the science behind some aspects of it. And so I was writing a lot about whipping siphons, which are basically the whipped cream container you can buy at the grocery store. It's a more industrial version, and you can do cool stuff with it. And so people would ask questions, and I'd be talking about, this is how the nitrous infuses the cream and, stabilizes the bubble formation and all this kind of really nerdy, interesting stuff. And then I had a party, and I set one out so people could use it to put a foam on top of their cocktails. And one person grabbed it and said, oh, this is really neat, and just held it up with the thing facing the wall and the base of the container over their cocktail and blew the foam onto the wall. And I was like, okay, I'm talking about nitrous and cavitation, and I need to remember to say, hold it like this. Like, they don't even have that base knowledge, which there's no reason that they should. And I just forgot about it and forgot who my audience was, which was people completely new to using this device.
That's a great example. And yeah, it's a missing step. And, you've got to think about the audience.
So where does it come out where's that line when you put out something that your audience doesn't understand, and they might misinterpret what your meaning was behind it. Going back and making sure that you're educating them and letting them know versus just being like, this is something that I should probably just not worry about addressing and just kind of move forward from that.
Well, there's times, I mean, one of the beauties of digital publishing is it's much easier to make corrections and updates. And I say if somebody points out an unclear step in a recipe, or if there are a lot of people asking the same question, that's a pretty good signal that the post needs to be revised. And that would be, that's a good thing. Embrace that and take advantage of it. And, occasionally there is something that should just be removed. If there's something that is going to be outdated very quickly, just take it down.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And from a blogging perspective, looking at what people are commenting on and then going back and adding that information to your post is just going to help your post do better in SEO and resonate with people that are reading it. So it definitely makes sense, especially on recipes or guides, to make sure you're getting all that kind of information and updating it to be as clear as it completely could be, right?
Absolutely. And depending on how your blog is set up and what platform you're using, in some cases, if there's nothing inherently wrong in the original post, then another very good approach is to do a new post that links back to the original post. So add new information as a separate post. But that's sort of a function of what the overall content design of your system is.
Makes sense. One of the questions I always have during a crisis or a fast-moving situation is, I understand that planning ahead, thinking through your response, and kind of knowing what you want to say is critical in gathering information. But there's this combination of coming up with your response and planning while also acknowledging that especially like now during COVID, you're never going to have all the information. When is it time to stop planning and finally just act and get something out there?
The time to get something out is immediate. The reason that my book is called The Communications Golden Hour is that what happens in the first hour of a crisis usually determines the outcome. Just like with a traumatic injury, if the bleeding and bandaging happens quickly enough and you're at the right kind of definitive care hospital, you can survive. I mean, I've had people, that's what the golden hour concept is. And in the media, it's now probably even less than an hour. If you don't tell your story, somebody else will. So even if you don't have all the information, it's really important to let people know that you hear them, that they've got questions, and that you're working on an answer. If there is something that's really urgent and fast moving, to say, hey, I'm getting questions about the recipe that I did on Hawaiian fish. I'm doing some more research. I'll get back with an answer as quickly as I can. And then obviously do the research, get the answer, and provide it. That's better than letting people, go crazy with negative comments, wondering what you're doing, wondering if you've even heard the complaints.
Yeah, it's frustrating when you step away to plan and you come back and people have been complaining that you're not doing anything because you didn't communicate with them. When if you right away, like you're saying, would have said, hey, I'm working on this, I'll get back to you. You're then at least taking control of the narrative a little bit, instead of they don't know and they're probably angry because it's broken.
A lot of times people just want to make sure that they're being heard. And that's true in food blogging. That's true in life-threatening emergencies. It's true in politics. It's true in any situation. Acknowledge that the people exist.
I'm surprised how many books and courses I sell to people and turn into fans who write in with negative comments that I reply to with kindness and let them know that I've heard them, even if I disagree, but I've heard them and here's my take on it. And it's amazing how often they go from being really upset to over something that I think is completely trivial to now becoming a fan just because I listened to them and paid attention.
Well, and sometimes the people who are complaining are right. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that.
Yeah.
I remember I put together a conference on social media for healthcare professionals a few years ago. And one of the presenters was from one of the biggest hospitals in the country. And she had this phenomenal example of a celebrity patient who it sounds like was not getting the right care. There was a real problem with the physical location of the patient's room. And the celebrity was really frustrated. And after not getting a response from the people there, went on to social media. And they saw the social, the folks who needed to see it saw the social media post and fixed it. And apologized personally, because that's really important, but also, actually, they waited for the celebrity to post that the situation had been fixed. And in fact, that celebrity went from being hostile and negative to being an enthusiastic supporter, because the hospital acknowledged that, hey, that wasn't what was supposed to happen. This should have been better. Thank you for letting us know. And they fixed it. I mean, mistakes happen. I mean, hopefully not in healthcare too often, but I've gotten things wrong when I've written recipes. I'm not happy about it, but every once in a while, even the people who test them for me miss a detail. Or sometimes it's just a typo that matters. Well, acknowledge, fix, and move on.
And I think sometimes you get hung up in saying, well, the recipe clearly says this and you misinterpreted what I wrote and that's your fault. And that does nothing for you as a blogger. It does nothing to diffuse the situation. And it'll probably, for every person writing in, how many people are seeing that and getting frustrated and not telling you about it. So I've always tried to take that with a grain of salt, that if someone complains about something, if it's my fault, I try to fix it instantly. But a lot of times I will look and be like, this is obvious, but apparently it's not obvious. So I need to make it more obvious to make it clear, because it's my goal as a recipe writer to make sure that I'm putting out information that anyone in my target audience can successfully follow. And if I failed at that, it's not their fault for misinterpreting something I wrote or for skipping a direction. Sometimes it's my fault for not making it clear that, like, hey, you can't change this or you can't substitute this ingredient if it's going to make the whole dish fail.
Now, I agree completely, but at the same time, I also suggest that people be careful about who you respond to. Generally speaking, if you've got somebody who's engaged with you on social media, on your blog, anywhere else, that's valuable and you want to encourage that. So engagement with real people is great. However, the spammers, the troll bots, and so on have gotten pretty clever. And I was working with a blogger a couple of weeks ago where she was just getting inundated with comments on her blog, and she didn't know how to manage this. And for a lot of reasons, she didn't realize that most of them were bots or spammers, well, probably spam bots, that were very cleverly picking up a couple of keywords from each post and creating poorly worded, but not entirely implausible questions or comments on each post. And that's a problem. You don't want to engage with those. But if somebody's really saying, hey, I tried making this recipe and it came out really bitter, is it possible that you've got the proportions wrong, or what mistake did I make? That's a valuable comment. That you want more of.
I try talking about spam bots and even people that are just out there to, trolls that are out there to stir up trouble. The thing that I always suggest is read the comment. And if it's someone that you think, genuinely cares and is interested and is trying to genuinely engage, then take the time and write back and engage with them and try to move forward. And if it's not, then I say either just delete the comment or ignore it. That if it, I personally never engage in negative comments that I think are just supposed to be inflammatory or trying to rile me up. That it's, I don't have time for that. I have enough going on in my life that I don't need to try to deal with pissed off people. But if it is someone that's upset with me because of my recipe or for something that I think is a valid reason, that like, yeah, they have a point here and it's something worth looking at, then I'll spend the time to work with them for it. But if it's just someone being crotchety, especially in my Facebook group with 40,000 sous viders get fired up, it's not worth my time to kind of make sure that everyone, doesn't get their feelings hurt when someone posts a recipe of tofu and someone's like, why the F would you ever do this? You're an idiot. It's like, they're out of the group. I'm not going to spend time talking to this person about why we should behave and treat other people with respect. So that's always what I recommend for people.
Well, and in fact, if you do it right, if you have engaged and have a true community of other people, if somebody posts a negative comment that is out of whack, you don't need to worry about it. Your other people will come and help. Yep. So cultivate the good relationships, and to the extent that you can just ignore the negative comments and posts, that's often a good thing. Now, there are people who are able to deal with human trolls, the folks who are really trying to be provocative. I can't think of anybody in the food world right now. I'm sure there are people who can do this. There's actually one police department that has just a brilliant social media person who has actually gotten the trolls to tell her to stop because she just doesn't take any garbage from naysayers, especially when they're saying something wrong. Doesn't mean she engages with everybody, but when that community was doing a survey of community attitudes toward a specific activity, one troll was saying they don't really want you to answer. And she just wrote back saying, well, actually, we really do want to know what you think. Here's the link to the survey. Please participate.
It's awesome. I always find it fascinating that people that engage with trolls and that enjoy it, especially the ones that try to turn them around. It's something that always drains my energy so much, which is why I don't focus on it a lot. I try very hard to focus on activities that provide me energy and not drain it. And that's the people that can do that. They just amaze me.
It has to be done with great care because those are much higher risk engagements than ordinary ones. And Katie is especially skilled at it. I would say that is like social media management 3 or 401. It's definitely not for somebody who's just doing it occasionally. It requires real care.
Nice. I have a question that I think has come up a lot lately, especially with food bloggers, is when there's a crisis or something big going on, like COVID is a great example of it, where is the line between being helpful and taking advantage of the situation? There's things that are clearly on either side, but where do those things how can you tell if you're actually helping your fans versus taking advantage of a bad situation?
Ask them. I mean, seriously, it's like, here's what I want to do, or here's what I'm doing. Is this helpful? Is this something you need? Particularly in March and April, when we were all in completely new territory, everybody was kind of figuring this out, and some were making mistakes, and for the most part, that's okay. I would say step one is have a clear idea of what it is you're trying to actually accomplish. If your goal is to make money off of people's misfortune, stop. Because that should not be your driver of activities. Yeah. If you've got something that you legitimately think is needed by either your current community or others, and you're doing it for the right reason, which could include profit, but that shouldn't be the single driver, offer it and see what happens. In early March, or it might have even been late February, I started getting emails from my IT vendors saying, hey, you may wind up having people working remotely. Are you ready? Here's what we can do. And I got two different messages that really stood out. One was from a vendor where basically the message was, our system is really geared to facilitate remote working. We're fabulous. You should buy our software. All right. It's a good platform. I know a lot of people that use that one. But was that really the most helpful message when we were all trying to figure out, okay, we're not going to be able to get into our offices for who knows how long. What do we do? The other vendor sent an unusually long message, but it started out saying, you may have heard our area has already gone into shelter in place, so none of our folks can come to our offices. We want to reassure you that our system was already set up to be managed remotely, so we're good. Your services are going to be protected. But we also want to share with you some of the things that we've been figuring out and some things that you might want to do now that we can help you with, so that if you have to send your employees home, you'll be able to keep running too. And it was a specific and incredibly helpful message. And I'm a small business, very small business, but there were things in there that I hadn't thought of and that absolutely helped me deal with what was coming. And if I wasn't already loyal to that vendor, you can bet that would have turned me into an absolutely steadfast, loyal customer. And that's the thing. They were doing something that was within their core expertise. So it was certainly supportive and consistent with their business, but it also was genuinely helpful.
I love that concept of two companies that were trying to basically get the same result, which is get your business. And one does a fine response. Like it doesn't sound like it was negative or like leaving a horrible taste in your mouth, but the other one really crafted content specifically for their fans and for, potential new fans. And that content is what separated them, even though the end pitch was kind of the same thing, like buy our service, but creating that specific content that really met the needs of the people they're trying to serve can turn something from okay to a really amazing, great piece of content, or to get the message out there.
And I think the key difference was that second company really put some effort into understanding who they were speaking to and what was their frame of mind going to be, and addressing it with that empathy that is so frequently missing. And that's the right starting point for any kind of communication. I mean, if I'm writing an article about how many different ethnic backgrounds are reflected in the dinner I'm planning, I need to know that there are going to be some people who see the word immigrant and immediately think this is something political. Mm-hmm. I have to write it knowing that attitude may be out there. I can choose to ignore that. I could choose to address it proactively, or I could just have that awareness as I'm writing. But knowing how people are going to take in whatever your message is crucial if you want your message to actually accomplish what you're trying to accomplish.
I think that's so valuable, that point of needing to know what your audience knows and their biases and what they're thinking to make sure you craft your message. And that's true whether you're writing a recipe, whether you're doing a sales page. They always say the easiest way to sell something is to talk to a bunch of people that are interested in it and capture exactly the wording that they're saying, because that's the wording that your target market is interested in using, is going through their head. If you can regurgitate that to them, they're more likely to get your product. And same with recipes. If you know exactly what they're trying to accomplish, then it's easier to write a recipe specifically for them, even if the end recipe is still like a chicken parm dish. If you're writing for health conscious people, then you're probably going to have a different message in your recipe head than if you're writing for people that want traditional American Italian food, or people that want comfort food. Like, the way you craft your message to them, your instructions and your ingredient list could be the exact same in all three cases, but knowing who your audience is and what niche you're in is going to change the recipe head and the information you have presenting that recipe to them.
Exactly. Every communication activity should have a very clear purpose, a very clear audience, and a very clear understanding of that audience. And after you write something, test it. I mean, I'm amazed at how many recipes get published that have never actually been proofread.
Yeah.
And it's pretty easy to get tablespoon and teaspoon mixed up. I mean, it happens. We make mistakes, but that's why you test. And if you want to be a successful blogger, if you're writing recipes, you need to make sure that the recipes actually work. And
minor detail.
It's very hard to proofread your own stuff, and take a little bit of extra time, give the recipe to somebody else and say, hey, would you try this? See if it works. And if you've got enough, professional friends, sometimes they can actually catch things just by eyeballing a recipe. It's like, wait a minute, I can't remember what site it was on, but I was trying to find a recipe for something a couple weeks ago. And during shelter in place, I've been having so much fun in the kitchen. I've been doing a lot of things way outside of my comfort zone. I found another one yesterday. There are recipes all over the place that have missing steps.
And if that's the first recipe or second recipe someone new to your blog or to your cookbook tries, that's the last one they're going to try.
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen huge mistakes in professional magazines and posts by well-known people, because they're not taking that extra time to make sure that it's missing. In fact, I was following a recipe yesterday that called for an ingredient in the instructions that wasn't in the ingredient list.
Always good when you're midway through and realize that.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about, change gears a little bit. We've been talking about some really heavy stuff. So I want to talk a little bit about working with traditional publishers, but as a little amuse-bouche in between courses here, I'd love to hear about some of the more interesting things you've been working on in the kitchen during the shelter in place.
Well, I've actually, when I was really young, I was interested in baking. And then when I went off to college, I had a much smaller kitchen the rest of my life, pretty much, and kind of didn't even think about it again. But hey, everybody else was making sourdough, so I guess I had to.
Nice.
And I have a family of sourdough starters that I've been caring for, and that's been intriguing because I knew nothing about any of that before. And I've been experimenting with different flours. I now know there's multiple sources of fresh milled flour in my community. It's like, I love living in the Bay Area. We're so lucky. So the bread baking has been kind of fun, fascinating in a lot of ways. The last couple of weeks, I've been experimenting with plant-based foods just because it's different. I made a chocolate mousse with garbanzo bean water, aquafaba, a couple nights ago, and I had worked with that before, so it wasn't entirely new, but I was taking it more seriously, and I'm a science geek, so it was interesting to see how the characteristics might not be what you expect, and ultimately what the flavor profile is. Those are a couple of things. And just I've also been trying to support the local farms and farmers as much as I can, which has been fun. So I wind up sometimes with vegetables I'd never played with before. And
nice. Which one have you used that you're like, I wish I knew this existed 20 years ago because it's amazing?
Oh, I don't know if there's anything. Well, I've made a lot more things with rhubarb than ever before, which I mean, that's a very common ingredient, but I didn't grow up in a family that made strawberry rhubarb pie, and I knew of rhubarb as this strange thing that was sometimes in cocktails and pies, and I didn't know there was any other use for it. And so that was kind of fun. I'm not as nervous about handling beets as I used to be. For some reason, I thought required a lot of care, and one of my professional cooking friends kind of persuaded me to be a little more open-minded. And because one of the produce boxes I had lots of beets, and I made what turned out to be really good pickled beets in like 10 minutes. It was great.
As a food blogger, I feel like I shouldn't admit this, but I cooked rhubarb for the first time in my life about a month ago as well. I had never used it, but I saw it. I was like, the giant red stalks. Like, I need to take some of this home and see what I can do with it. It was good. I don't think I was missing out on a ton. It's not like I just discovered bacon for the first time, but I made a rosemary rhubarb infused simple syrup for cocktails and sodas, and made a good like curried almost chutney with it, and something else that I forget. But it was fun to explore a new ingredient and kind of dive in and flex the creative muscles a little bit again.
I've also been trying to use more of what I have. So I made a pesto out of carrot tops. Ooh. That was pretty good. I mean, basil's better, but I hate throwing stuff away. So that was kind of good. And it's come up a couple of times now. I really need to get a new whipping siphon. That's for some reason, when I left New York, I gave the whipping siphon that I had there away. I don't know why. I had a really good one. I'm sure somebody else is using it and enjoying it, but I want to make, I mean, heck, I've got cucumbers and carrots. I've got all kinds of things that I could pickle really quick if I have a siphon.
Yep. Exploring with uses too. You could also foam those up, use some of the xanthan gum or agar, some more plant-based, extracts, and make some fun cucumber water foams and froths.
Great fun. And it tastes good. I mean, for me, the kitchen is where I do my relaxation. I learn about other places, other people, other cultures. And it's completely removed from the crazy world that we live in.
It is almost meditative when you get in the kitchen sometimes and just kind of cooking away and enjoying yourself. It can be a nice disconnect from the craziness that's going on everywhere else. So we had a bunch of questions people were writing in ahead of time, so I wanted to make sure we get to those. The first time you and I met was at the International Food Blogger Convention, and you were moderating a panel on bloggers working with traditional media and how some of that works. So I got a bunch of questions kind of about that process. I wanted to first, how does the typical blogger to media relationship work? How do you get in front of them or find them, or how?
Any way that you can is the real answer. This is where things have changed considerably. When I started my blog, my food blog, I think I started around 2003-ish. Wow. I guess I was kind of lucky. I wish I'd started it in 1998 when somebody actually tried to convince our blog, and Anyway, but at the time, there weren't millions of bloggers. Um, but even then, I knew there were other bloggers writing about food, wine, and restaurants. So I narrowed my focus. And in its initial iteration, I focused geographically. Most of my blog posts had to do with the county in which I live, which is just outside San Francisco. And that worked out really well because I became certainly one of the recognized experts on the food and wine scene in my area. And that's how I wound up getting a call from one of the editors at the San Francisco Chronicle saying, hey, would you write for us? Which was good because they could see your work. They could see my work. And that still works. The difference, though, is that there are fewer and fewer newspapers. There are even fewer newspapers who have a budget to buy any content at all. And there's a lot of people who are willing to do it for free. So if your goal is to make money, this is probably not a really good direction to go. Mm-hmm. If that's okay, and personally, I don't think it's okay to do writing for a for-profit entity without getting something in return. It has to be something of value to you. It is not always cash. Mm-hmm. I had a client years ago who, they paid me with gift cards to their restaurants. And since they ran 10 of the best restaurants in the region, that was really good. Totally worked out for me. Sometimes whoever you're writing for has something they can offer that is inexpensive to them, but of great value to you. So, look for those opportunities. But the thing is to have a niche, have something that is as unique to you as possible so that your expertise is reflected in what you post. The other thing is really pay attention to quality, because if a brand or a publisher is interested in working with you and they go to your site and they see 9 really good posts and 1 really bad one, that really bad one might take you out of the running. Mm-hmm. So that matters. The other thing is, and I've seen this now in recruitments for commercial publications lately, we are in the world of the personal brand, and everybody is a publisher. So what is your brand? You should have your own brand marketing plan, just as the makers of your favorite soda have a marketing plan. What is your business? What are you trying to do? What is your goal? How are you going to monetize it, if at all? Money's not everything, but if money is what you're trying to do, what is the business model? So for me, I never intended to make money off my blog, but it absolutely leveraged my way into paying writing and consulting projects, which has worked out really well for me. Let people know who you are, what you do, and make it easy for them to figure out what you can do for them without necessarily being overtly salesy, because there's a boundary there. You want to be open and friendly and helpful, but you don't want to be in everybody's face. I'm not a big fan of all these pop-ups, and even on my website, I've got a few that I wish I could suppress, but I just don't have time to really optimize things. But you want to get people onto your list, because your email list is the most valuable thing. If you've got a strong brand and a lot of followers, including a way to reach them, you instantly become valuable to whether it's a newspaper or a book publisher or anybody else. So that's where you should put some energy. If you have a lot of followers on social media, what are you doing to maintain those followers and stay engaged? I've seen people with literally 1 million followers, but very little engagement. Mm-hmm. That person is not going to be published by commercial media. But the person who's got 3,000 followers, where half of them are in a specific industry sector at senior levels, that's more valuable. So know what you're trying to do it, and do it well, and do it consistently. And again, I'm talking about things that people should do that I'm not that good at myself. I can't remember the last time I posted on my food, which I'm embarrassed by. But I'm not going to be attracting any consulting or writing offers for Food and Wine right now, because who's going to read my blog? I wouldn't.
If you are interested in something like Food and Wine or a specific magazine or publication, is it okay to reach out to them? And if so, who do you reach out to there, and how do you go about that?
Well, the ranks of editors have always changed frequently. Lately, even more so. I mean, this year we've had a lot of publications close down completely or almost closed down. So if you go to the library and look up a reference list of who's the editor of whatever publication, odds are it's a different person today. Could even be a different person this week from last week. This is actually where social media does really play a big role. If there's a publication that you want to be published in, find the reporters and editors from that publication on social media, follow them, get to know what they post about, and find a way to engage with them on social media. Twitter is particularly good for this purpose. And establish the relationships. It's networking, but it's digital networking.
Justin asks, I am interested in writing a cooking at home series for a magazine that focuses on different local ingredients each month. Would you pitch the entire series or pitch a single article first?
If you have never written for that publication before, the editor's not going to buy a series right off the bat. So I would recommend pitching the first article, and in your pitch, you can say, this could become a series, but you're going to have to be very clear about why you're the best person to do that and how you can actually achieve it. I've taught some classes on pitching, and one of the things that is almost always missing from pitches is the explanation as to why you should be the person selected to write this article. Remember, there aren't that many unique ideas. So odds are, whatever story idea you've got, somebody else may have already done it, may have already pitched it, they may have already worked on it, it may have even already published. So don't presume that the article's been stolen if another person winds up writing that story. But you have to explain why it's special to you. Perhaps there's an expert that you have unique access to. Or in many cases, and this is where food bloggers have great opportunity, maybe you're writing about a certain set of ingredients that you have special experience with. Maybe you used to work on a farm where some of this stuff was grown. So you're bringing that knowledge to the table that few other writers may have.
That makes a lot of sense. You have to kind of even more niche your niche to get down to specifically what is that kind of the superpower that you're bringing to your writing, and that of all the other bloggers that could write about a specific ingredient, why would they want to choose you, and make sure that you very clearly communicate that to them up front.
Exactly.
Lori Rice asks, any tips for conflict resolution when you and your publisher or editor don't see eye to eye? How do you evaluate when to hold your ground and when to accept necessary changes and move on?
Those never happen. There's never any disputes with editors.
Never.
That is a hard one. That's one where you have to make a judgment call. Is the change that the editor wants going to really make a difference, or just something, a sentence you loved that you have to say goodbye to? I'm really lucky. My book editor is just phenomenal and knows how to tell me, "Hey, Doug, this paragraph is just terrible. Try it." Or in some cases, she'll actually, say, "I think what you're trying to say," and she'll do it. That's the advantage of having an editor that I've now worked with for a while. If it's an editor you haven't worked with, you want to be careful about, is this really something you want to fight with? I would say that anything having to do with facts is worth fighting over, because you do not want something going out with your name on it that has a factual error. Even if it wasn't your error, you'll get for it.
Yeah, the thing that I pushed back. Oh, sorry.
The style thing. Well, style, I would care a little bit less about, and I also would appreciate that the editor probably knows the audience better than you do, because they're in the business of making successful products.
Yeah, I had to push back a lot on my cookbook because they didn't want to use Ziploc brand bags in the cookbook intro because they try not to use branding. But they kept trying to change it everywhere to zip top bags. I was like, but with sous vide, a lot of zip top bags aren't rated at all for cooking. So people doing this could poison themselves. And it's literally Ziploc brand is one of the only ones, Ziploc brand freezer specifically, are one of the only ones that can do it. And so that was something that I pushed back on a lot, where they also didn't like the term sous videing or sous vided. They wanted just the process of using sous vide instead of sous videing. And I was like, if you give me the Ziploc, I will give you this one, because this is styled and how I write. But if you hired me to write the book, but if you don't want my voice coming through as much, that's your decision as the publisher. But this other one is a safety issue, and I'm not going to let you put out a book with my name on it that's going to potentially hurt people.
That's a perfect example, and I probably would have done the same thing. I remember when I was first writing for the when I was freelancing for the San Francisco Chronicle, there were some common terms that, for whatever reason, they did not use. Things that you and I would use when we're talking about food and stuff. And that's okay. They own the printing presses, so they get to decide. And you know what? They have style guides. They actually have decisions on this stuff that are for consistency. Okay, that's fine.
If I want my unedited voice to be out there, I have the option to do that through self-publishing and my blog and social media and 100 other platforms. And if I want to be in food and wine, then I need to a large extent, play by their rules, because they are buying a service from me, not just offering for the kindness of their hearts to publish whatever I want on their platform.
Exactly.
Well, Doug, I really appreciate you coming on. If any of you want more information from Doug to learn about some of the stuff he does around crisis control, reputation management, his blog on food and wine, you can go to douglevy.com and check it out. Doug, I really appreciate you coming on, sharing so much of your expertise you've gathered over so many decades of working in the industry.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun, and I love when we are able to have conversations where my many different worlds all combine into one, and they do, and that makes the world of food so interesting and entertaining and usually relaxing too.
Nice. Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate everyone tuning in to watch. This has been Makin Bacon, all about helping you serve your fans, grow your income, and get the most out of your blog. Till next time, I'm Jason Logston. Thanks a lot for joining us, everyone.